The staging area hummed with the low thrum of grav vehicles and alien chatter, alive with the idle confidence of the Galactic Coalition forces. Sleek exo-frames glinted under the lights of the orbital platform, their polished surfaces reflecting soldiers from a dozen different species, each one bred, bioengineered, or trained to perfection. War, to them, was mathematics and automation, efficiency, precision, victory by design. They lounged in clusters, watching as the final transport docked with a metallic groan. The humans had arrived. A hiss of hydraulics preceded the opening of the ramp, and from the shadows stepped the Terran platoon. Understated uniforms of ballistic weave and ceramic plating clashed with the photonic armor worn by the rest. Their boots were heavy, their movements deliberate. There was no ceremony in their arrival, just silence, as though they carried with them the hush of history. An insectoid officer clicked mandibles in amusement. "Are these the humans? I expected more wires." Laughter followed. A tall Corellian, scaled and elegant, leaned toward companion. "They brought relics. One of them's carrying a rifle, a projectile rifle." The object of ridicule was indeed unusual. From a long black case, one human, short, with a face like weathered granite, produced a weapon from another age. Long, angular, and clad in scratched metal, it lacked the elegance of plasma carbines or the humming menace of grav rifles. It looked outdated, obsolete, but the human, Sergeant Keller by his unit patch, cradled it with care. "Is that for display?" asked another alien, stepping forward. A Valari tactician, voice crisp and amused. Keller didn't answer. He simply adjusted the scope, his expression unreadable. Behind him, Lieutenant Harper scanned the gathered coalition forces, her eyes lingering on their soft arrogance. "We're honored to fight alongside you," she said diplomatically, though her voice held a cool edge. "We trust the mission briefing is unchanged?" The Valari nodded, waving a hand toward a floating hollow projector. "Enemy fortress. Auto turrets. Old Mets. Nothing your boomsticks can't handle, right?" More laughter. Even the humans smiled. Faintly, the coalition had encountered resistance on the outskirts of Vorta 9, a jungle moon turned militant stronghold. The defenders, remnants of an old war faction, had fortified themselves with relic tech. Relic, to the coalition, meant manageable, predictable. Their weapons, after all, were decades ahead. But Harper knew better. She'd read the reports buried beneath formal dismissals. Shielded bunkers that shrugged off directed energy attacks. Autonomous tanks that adapted to electromagnetic signatures. And silence from every high-tech squad sent before them. She stepped aside as Sergeant Keller latched the case shut and slung the long rifle over his shoulder. "You sure about that one?" whispered Private Torres, watching the snickers ripple across the alien ranks. Keller's response was low and firm. "It's not for them." Torres frowned. "Then who?" Keller didn't reply. Across the room, the Coalition Command Unit gestured the teams forward. A shimmering map unfurled in the air, marked with the enemy's last known coordinates. "We deploy at dawn. Sectors A through D are primary strike zones. Human Squad will support Sector C. Hold your line. Avoid unnecessary losses. Precision matters." The Human Squad moved to their designated area. Quiet amid the chatter, they began stripping down their gear, checking each component with disciplined ritual. Harper observed Keller meticulously load large, blunt rounds into a belt pouch, each slug as thick as 2 fingers, their dull brass casing gleaming faintly. A Norn engineer passed by and paused, squinting. "What are those?" "Gifts," Keller muttered without looking up. The engineer blinked. "Gifts?" He clicked the pouch shut and stood. "For tanks." Night fell swiftly over Vorta 9. The jungle below the orbital platform breathed thick fog into the dark, and alien birds screeched into the void. As soldiers returned to their bunks, the humans remained awake, sitting in a circle with gear between them, cleaning weapons and sharing quiet words. No jokes, no bluster. Their silence wasn't insecurity. It was memory. The rifle that now lay across Keller's knees had once cracked through steel on the battlefields of Earth. It had killed machines that believed themselves unkillable. The design had outlived generations of war doctrine, not because it was perfect, but because it was brutally effective when nothing else would work. Across the hangar, the coalition laughed over simulated war games and bets. The Cerealian from afore leaned against a crate, mimicking the recoil of a ballistic weapon with exaggerated jerks. Harper glanced toward them, then back to her squad. Let them laugh. Torres nodded. They'll stop. Keller finished cleaning the chamber and let the bolt slide home with a sharp metallic click. In that moment, it sounded louder than any plasma coil. He looked out across the hangar, eyes steady. They always do. The fog outside grew denser, wrapping around the landing gear transports like a warning. Below, unseen in the trees and soil of Orta 9, something stirred, waiting. It did not care for plasma or lasers or theory. It understood destruction. And tomorrow, it would meet a weapon made for nothing else. The rifle lay still, cold and patient. Like its wielder, it did not need approval. It only needed a target. Dawn came not with light, but with sirens. From orbit, Vorta, 9 was a swirl of storm cloud jungles and ash-gray ruins, an old battlefield hardened by time and forgotten treaties. Dropships cut through the mist like needles, their hulls trembling as they descended into the soup of vapor and humidity. Within one such craft, Harper stood with her squad, hands clasped around a safety rail. No one spoke. Keller sat near the rear, the long anti-tank rifle secured in a padded cradle beside him. His gaze was distant, focused not on the flickering status readouts or the clatter of gear, but on the shape of the forest that waited below. It was ancient, tangled, and shrouded in echoes, the kind of place that swallowed tech and made ghosts of soldiers. Across the comms, the Coalition command voice crackled through. Sector C insertion. Proceed with Operation Sandglass. Suppress enemy stronghold. Disable armor patrols. All units, maintain combat discipline. Minimal losses expected. Minimal, Harper thought, was a word used too easily by those who never bled. Their dropship landed in a clearing ringed by obsidian-rooted trees. The Cerealian unit deployed first, moving with synchronized grace. 6 limbs each, armor humming faintly as it activated anti-personnel shielding. Behind them, the Norn heavy gunners and Valari scouts broke into teams, flanking forward with confident chatter. The jungle swallowed them quickly. Harper's squad moved in behind the others, slower, tighter. No drone support, no tactical AI uplink. Just eyes, steel, and instinct. Within minutes, the forest became a labyrinth of shadows and wet silence. The ground squelched beneath boots, and the only light came from brief flickers of bioluminescent moss. At point, Torres crouched beside a rotting tree trunk, motioning the team to halt. Thermal's acting weird, he whispered. Getting spikes, then nothing. Keller raised his rifle's scope and swept the terrain. They've got jammers. Not passive. Adaptive. Based on signal density. Meaning, they're listening, waiting. Further ahead, a soft pop echoed, followed by a burst of static on Coalition comms. Then screaming. Harper tapped her earpiece. Command, this is C Unit. Do you copy? No response. More static. Another explosion. A ripple of red fire lit the canopy ahead. The Cerealian line had walked into a kill box. From concealed bunkers beneath the roots, automated turrets rose like blooming thorns. Cannons the size of tree trunks erupted with shattering force, flinging steel slugs that tore through personal shields as if they were fog. The sleek, elegant armor of the Coalition cracked like glass. A mechanized walker, old but heavily retrofitted, surged through the smoke. Its plating was jagged and dark, pitted from decades of war, but its targeting systems were flawless. Plasma bolts from Coalition rifles sparked harmlessly against its chassis. Harper pulled her squad down behind a shallow ridge, her voice cutting through the chaos. Hold position. Don't engage until I say. They're getting slaughtered, Torres muttered, his knuckles white around his carbine. Keller lay flat, sliding the anti-tank rifle into position. He adjusted for wind. There wasn't any, and distance, 800 meters, uphill, partial cover. Harper crouched beside him. That thing's walking straight through our line. Good. You have a shot? Not yet. Need a second. He exhaled slowly, the way someone might before diving into deep water. Tell them to fall back behind this ridge. Coalition comms are jammed. Then make some noise. Harper turned to Torres. Flares, now. He fired 2 rounds into the air, old-tech chemical combustion. They cut through the mist like flares from another era. Moments later, a few surviving coalition units began staggering back toward the humans' position, dragging wounded and abandoning what was left of their dignity. The mech lumbered into view, its main gun swiveling to track movement. A Valari screamed as a shell hit him square in the chest, folding him in half. Keller's finger tensed on the trigger. The rifle spoke. There was no hiss, no flash of light, only a deafening crack that rolled through the forest like thunder. The mech shuddered. A crater bloomed in its chest plate, molten steel spraying out like arterial blood. It staggered once, twice, then crumpled into itself with a mechanical shriek. The forest froze. Every eye turned toward the sound. A Corellian officer, one arm burned and dragging a fractured leg, looked at the collapsed machine and then at Keller, still prone, still scanning. What was that? Keller didn't look up. A reminder. More Mets emerged, 3 this time, firing wildly. The coalition tried to regroup, but their lines were broken. Command was silent. The sky above swirled with EMP clouds, blotting out satellite feeds. Harper grabbed her squad. New objective. We hold this ridge. Keller, pick your targets. Torres, lay suppressing fire. Everyone else, eyes on flanks. The next shot dropped the second mech. Through a narrow gap in the trees, Keller had spotted its exposed coolant valve, an anachronism in modern design, but an Achilles heel nonetheless. The round tore through armor, tubing, and finally the core, which exploded in a flare of orange. Even as coalition soldiers scrambled to understand what was happening, the tide shifted, not because of strategy, not because of air support, but because one rifle, long, heavy, and stubbornly analog, was tearing through the enemy like an old god awoken. Within minutes, the enemy patrols began to withdraw. Their ambush had failed. Their confidence cracked. The humans didn't celebrate. They moved efficiently, checking gear, dragging coalition wounded to cover. The Corellians offered no more taunts. The Valari tacticians avoided eye contact. Keller reloaded, sliding another brass cartridge into the chamber with a mechanical finality. Harper stood beside him, scanning the smoke-thick horizon. We're not done yet. No, Keller said, but they finally stopped laughing. The ridge was quiet, but not with peace. It was a hush that followed devastation, the breath between barges. Smoke drifted low over the ground, curling through underbrush and the blackened stumps of shattered trees. In the distance, the jungle burned, the fireless kind, electronic wreckage hemorrhaging sparks and heat from cooling fusion cores. And in the center of the ridge, Keller adjusted the elevation on his scope. A low thud vibrated through ground. Then another. Harper didn't need visual confirmation. She recognized the pattern. Heavy walkers, more than one. They're regrouping, she said, voice low. This isn't retreat. It's reformation. Torres ducked beside a rock outcropping, glancing back at the human squad. They've learned. No exposed coolant lines this time. And the armor's heavier. From the smoke, shapes began to resolve. Squat, reinforced Mets, bulkier than before, plated with reactive layers designed to counter modern plasma weapons. They move with grim purpose, their limbs hissing with hydraulics, weapons bristling like metal thorns. One of the coalition scouts, a feathered prass with bloodied wings, crawled into view and gasped. Those units weren't in the brief. They're custom-built, field-modified. Harper helped him up, eyes narrowing. They knew we'd adapt, so they adapted first. Keller was already sighting in. Anything? She asked. He didn't answer immediately. Then, too much armor on the forward plates. Weak points are internal. Joints, vents, ammo feeds. Torres laughed bitterly. You planning to shoot through a quarter-ton of metal to hit a hinge? Keller blinked once, slow. No, I'm going to wait until they forget I'm here. The enemy moved in a staggered wedge, scanning in overlapping arcs. Harper could see the calculus of it. Methodical, disciplined, not some desperate last charge. Whoever commanded them knew exactly where to hurt. Coalition troops scrambled behind trees and ruined sensor stations, their advanced weapons dimmed by sheer futility. Plasma left scorches. The enemy didn't care about scorches. One of the walkers opened fire, and the ridge shook. A fortified section of earth burst apart, sending a Sorelian skidding across the ground, legs crushed beneath his armor. A Valari gunner took a round to the chest plate, thrown backwards like a doll. The rest broke formation, fear outweighing pride. Harper watched the line dissolve. They're falling apart. We hold, Keller said flatly. She looked at him. It's not our war, Keller. We were brought in as support. This, he interrupted, calm as ever. Then let's support them. Another mech shifted position, pivoting to fire again. Its exposed side plate turned slightly, just a half-second of vulnerability, hardly noticeable. The rifle fired. The sound cracked the air like a whip. The round slammed into the mech's hip joint with a wet, metallic crunch. Sparks exploded. Then fire. It teetered, lost balance, and toppled into the trees, taking two others down with it. The enemy line paused. Then something changed. The mechs began to spread out, recalibrating. They were learning Keller's timing, adapting to the cadence of death. A slow, creeping intelligence governed their motions now, algorithms predicting sniper windows and adjusting formation accordingly. Harper knew it, too. They're boxing us in. Keller pulled the bolt, chambered the next round. Then we push out. How? He stood. For the first time since the battle began, rifle cradled against his chest like a promise. I move. You draw fire. When they expose to target you, I'll kill them. You're not invincible. No, he agreed. But neither are they. Harper looked at him for a long beat, reading something beneath the surface. An old burden, maybe, or a lifetime of understanding what machines could and could not fear. Go, she said. Keller broke into a crouched sprint, weaving through underbrush, positioning for a new angle. Harper gave the signal. Torres rose from cover with a war cry and opened fire. Old tech slug rounds rattled harmlessly off a mech's armor, but the distraction worked. A turret swiveled. A head turned. The rifle fired again. This time the shot tunneled through an optic array, rupturing internal targeting software. The mech spasmed, then began firing wildly at its own allies before collapsing in a smoking heap. The coalition saw it, and something shifted. The survivors rallied, not out of pride, but out of raw, desperate belief. The myth of technological supremacy had failed them, but a rifle had not. Sorelians began coordinating suppressing fire. The Prass scout took to the air again, spotting weak links from above. Valari tacticians marked shot angles based on terrain elevations. For the first time, the coalition adapted to him. Keller moved like a ghost across the battlefield, using the chaos as cover. He reappeared atop a broken turret nest and fired again. Another mech fell. The last two walkers began to retreat. Harper didn't chase. She let them go. The ridge was silent, but for the ticking of overheated metal and the soft, mechanical gasp of mechs winding down into death. Keller returned slowly, the rifle slung across his back, smoke rising faintly from the barrel. He knelt beside the broken Sorelian officer, whose blood ran in streams across the dirt. The alien looked up at him, mandibles twitching. That weapon doesn't belong in this war. Keller shook his head once. It belongs anywhere people need to survive. The officer tried to speak again, but the words failed. Harper stepped in, placing a hand gently over his eyes. He didn't resist. Behind them, the jungle still burned. Torres approached, eyes scanning the quiet. Commands finally reestablished comms. They want to report. Tell them Sector C is secure, Harper replied. And the weapon? She looked at Keller, who was reloading one final time. Tell them it's just an old rifle. They all knew it was more than that, and the war wasn't over. Reinforcement arrived 12 hours later. Too late to change anything. Too soon for the dead to be buried. Coalition dropships screamed down from orbit like avenging titans, engines churning up ash and scattered debris. Fresh troops poured out in neat formation, every one of them gleaming in armor that hadn't yet tasted dirt or fire. Their boots met blood-soaked soil without hesitation, guided by orders rather than understanding. They looked around with vague unease, processing the scene like a simulation gone wrong. Twisted mech wreckage smoldered in heaps. Alien bodies lay half-buried in craters. Trees had been cleaved in half by kinetic shockwaves. A war had happened here, a real one, not the clean strategic engagements their analysts preferred. And someone had won it, but not the way they were trained to understand. At the center of it all sat Keller, cross-legged beside the anti-tank rifle that lay across his knees like a relic in prayer. He was cleaning it quietly, as he always did after battle, every movement precise, every swipe of the cloth along the long barrel a ritual of memory. Brass casings glittered faintly at his feet, like gold coins at an old shrine. The silence didn't last. Valari officers descended from their command skiff like hawks, flanked by aides and drones buzzing with data feeds. One of them, Colonel Deshin, approached with stiff posture and clipped tones. His gaze lingered on the rifle, then flicked to Keller. "You disregarded direct protocol," Deshin began, tapping a sleek tablet with a clawed finger. "Operated outside tactical parameters. Weaponry not sanctioned. Non-compliant battlefield engagement." Harper, standing nearby, stiffened. "Our section was cut off. Comms down. We adapted." Deshin didn't look at her. Adaptation is not licensed for improvisation. There are expectations in coalition warfare. Standards. Keller didn't look up. Standards don't stop metal. The colonel blinked. "Excuse me?" Keller calmly pulled a carbon filament brush through the rifle's chamber. "Tactics are clean on paper. But clean doesn't matter when the jungle spits machines at your throat. This weapon," he patted the rifle's warm steel, "it doesn't care about doctrine. It just works." Harper stepped in, voice even. 6 shots dropped 6 armored targets. Held the line when everything else failed. Deshin bristled. "That's anecdotal. It's survival," she snapped. Around them, soldiers were beginning to gather, not deliberately, just slowly, drawn by something quiet and magnetic. Some were coalition, some human, others from half a dozen species whose names Keller didn't know. They watched him, or maybe they watched the rifle. It didn't matter. It was part of him now and them, too. Deshin's tone cooled further. "There will be an inquiry. This incident, this weapon, has triggered concerns at Central Command. You've disrupted carefully curated operations." Keller stood slowly, letting the rifle hang from his shoulder. "Then they'll need to curate harder." The colonel opened his mouth, but said nothing. There was nothing left to argue. The ridge was still standing. Later, as the sun began to sink and the ridge burned orange with low light and memory, Harper stood at its edge, gazing down at the battlefield. Drones buzzed above, mapping the carnage into sterile layers. Mech cores smoldered. Blood soaked the underbrush. There was no triumph here, only weight. Torres walked up, brushing soot from his armor. "They'll twist it. Say we won because of combined firepower or a tactical realignment. Give the credit to some algorithm back at Fleet Command." "They always do," Harper replied, not turning. "But it wasn't a tactic. It was a man, a weapon, a moment." He glanced at Keller, still seated, still quiet. "You think he cares about the credit?" "No," she said, "but he'll carry the cost." They stood there for a while, the silence deeper than before, less about absence, more about presence. The kind of silence that lingers after something essential has been spoken. When Harper finally approached Keller, she didn't speak at first. She simply knelt beside him, watching the soft motion of cloth over steel. It was intimate, in a way, the kind of care rarely afforded to weapons anymore. "You ever tell anyone where you got it?" she asked. Keller shrugged. "Great-grandfathers. Locked in a case back home. Said it kicked harder than a horse and broke shoulders if you didn't brace right. And you brought it into a war centuries beyond its time. It doesn't know it's old." She smiled faintly. "Neither do you." He looked at her then, and for a moment, the steel behind his eyes softened. "You asked me what this was before. This battle, this rifle. I remember. He turned his gaze back toward the jungle. It's a reminder that war is always personal, that behind every line of code, there's still someone who bleeds. And sometimes it takes something ancient to remind the future of that. The shuttle engines began to roar in the distance, signaling extraction. The survivors would move on, debrief, get reassigned. Some would drink. Others would bury names in quiet corners of memory. Keller stood and slung the rifle over his shoulder. It looked heavier now, but also earned, worn by purpose. As they walked toward the shuttle, new recruits passed them, whispers following in their wake. "That's him," one murmured. "The sniper with the Earth relic. The one who stopped the mech charge." Harper didn't correct them. Neither did Keller. Myths had to start somewhere. At the ramp, Harper paused and looked back one final time. The ridge was just a strip of scorched soil and shattered metal. But to her, it was sacred ground. Not because it had been held, but because someone had reminded the universe that old God still had teeth. The stars above blinked into view, distant and watching. And somewhere out there, another war waited, but it would remember this one.